Be me, Nick, 33. I'm a back-end engineer at a company that makes software for warehouses. It's the kind of job where one small mistake can turn into a big mess. Our system helps schedule trucks and loading times. When it goes wrong, drivers end up waiting. Then managers start calling and everyone panics. The office is normal. The coffee is bad. We all follow one rule. If you spot a problem, fix it early. Because if you wait, it gets worse fast. Unwritten rule runs the place. If you see a fire, you grab a bucket, not a meeting invite. Ops guys move fast, engineers move faster, and product moves in circles until someone drags it forward. Nobody here is a saint, but the machine stays running because people do invisible glue work without asking for applause. HR used to match that vibe, especially Laura, our people ops lead who'd been here for years. 3 years in, Laura knew the job, knew the personalities, and knew when to leave engineers alone. Snacks appeared during war rooms, payroll got fixed quietly, and onboarding didn't feel like a hostage negotiation. Jokes landed, boundaries existed, and she never tried to turn a deploy into a group therapy session. Respect for her was easy because she respected reality, including the ugly parts of reality. Then leadership rewarded her with a special program and a proud LinkedIn post. Title sounded like a sermon with a budget. Inclusive Leadership Intensive, Cultural Transformation Track. Month of offsites, coaching calls, certifications, and that whole "you are now a change agent" ritual. We joked she'd come back speaking only in slogans, then went back to our tickets like normal adults. Monday after her return arrives, and the jokes stop being funny within 10 minutes. New haircut, new posture, and a polished smile that feels like it was trained into place. Old Laura used to speak like a person, but new Laura speaks like a slide with an HR degree. Phrases show up that never lived in her mouth before, like holding space and communication power. Lunchline gets weird when she thanks the ops lead for his vulnerability after he complains about a printer. My manager texts, "She's back from cult camp," and I laugh, then immediately regret laughing. First week stays tolerable because everyone assumes it's a phase like a new gym membership. Second week brings a calendar invite titled Reset, Communication Norms, with sparkles and a pastel header. Titles with colons are always trouble, like punctuation is trying to warn you. Big room fills up, Zoom tiles blink, and Laura stands up front with a clicker and calm eyes. Opening is smooth and practiced, the kind of calm that means the chaos was planned. She says we have an opportunity to level up our culture, and Brad the director nods like a bobblehead. She says power dynamics and who takes up space, and half the room pretends to take notes. Then the first rule drops like it's obvious and overdue. She says men will practice not interrupting women for 30 days, framed as a learning experiment. She smiles while saying it, like we're about to discover inner peace through obedience. Some people clap softly because corporate clapping is a reflex, like yawning. I think fine because basic politeness is not war, and we can survive 30 days. Third week arrives and the experiment gains paperwork, which is how corporate things become permanent. Friendly reminder email lands with bullet points, brand colors, and a link to resources. Fourth week arrives and the bullets become a policy document with a version number. Policy expands fast because simple rules are never enough for people who crave control. Men should not speak first in meetings because speaking first is dominating the space. Men should speak only when called on because volunteering is centering male urgency. Men should avoid corrective interjections because correction can feel invalidating. Men should phrase disagreements as curious questions because directness is unsafe. Humor should be minimized because humor can be exclusionary and coded. Accountability line shows up at the bottom, promising coaching and tracking for repeat pattern issues. Brad forwards it with a cheerful, "Great progress," like he's forwarding a coupon, not a landmine. No one explodes because exploding is how you get labeled and quietly removed. Work still has deadlines, so we shrug and adapt like people who enjoy eating. Meetings start changing in small ways that feel harmless until they become expensive. Wrong statements slide by untouched because correcting now looks like interrupting. Fantasy timelines get approved because pushing back now looks like dominating. Silence grows in the room, but not peaceful silence, more like a waiting room before surgery. People start waiting to be called on like school kids, hands metaphorically in their laps. Sometimes the meeting ends and nobody asks the engineers anything, which used to be impossible. Then the decision comes back as a ticket, and engineering gets told to make it work. Laura begins sitting in more meetings not to help, but to watch like an auditor. Her after-meeting notes arrive with quotes and labels like she's tagging wildlife. "Tone felt sharp," she writes, after someone tries to prevent a risky rollout. "Urgency can be oppressive," she writes, after ops asks for a fix before a client escalates. It's exhausting, but still not catastrophic, so everyone keeps their head down. Then a big client project hits, the kind with penalties that make executives sweat through their shirts. Client is a national warehouse chain, high volume, low patience, and they call outages breach events. Scope is huge, sales promised miracles, and kickoff meeting is scheduled for Friday morning. Kickoff meetings are where engineers normally stop bad ideas before they become disasters. Kickoff begins and I see the landmine within the first 3 minutes. Product manager Jess presents a plan that assumes we can infer trailer weights from historical patterns. Physics laughs quietly in the corner, but the slide looks confident, so nobody wants to be rude. Timeline says 2 sprints, which is adorable, like paying rent with Monopoly money. Instinct kicks in and my mouth opens, because this is where I usually save the company. Memory kicks in and my mouth closes because Laura's policy is sitting in the back like a judge. Rule says men do not speak first, and men do not correct women in the moment. I wait for someone else to flag it, hoping the universe will call on me. Dan, the other senior engineer, makes eye contact that screams, "Are you seeing this?" Tiny nod passes between us. Then Dan looks down at his notebook like it's suddenly holy scripture. Jess asks for thoughts, and the room does that new dead quiet, like a microphone got unplugged. Laura smiles, visibly pleased, as if silence itself is a metric that just improved. Jess panics a little and fills the space with sounds like alignment, because nobody corrected her. Junior Dev says, "Looks good," trying to be supportive and not get noticed. Brad nods, plan gets approved, and the landmine is now an official roadmap item. After the meeting, speech feels dangerous, so we do what careful people do. We write. Doc gets created with calm language, no sharp edges, and lots of questions instead of statements. Charts get attached, risks get listed, mitigation path gets offered like a gift, Email goes to Jess, Brad, and Laura because Laura loves being CC'd on reality. Jess replies, "Thanks, we'll monitor," which translates to, "We are not changing anything." Brad replies, "Great collaboration," which translates to, "Please don't make me decide." Laura replies, "Appreciate the tone," which translates to, "Good boy." Plan stays the same because nobody with authority wants to admit the timeline is fantasy. 2 weeks later, pilot goes live, and the landmine explodes in public. Routing engine starts assigning trucks like it's hallucinating and hates drivers personally. Dock schedules become nonsense, drivers wait, supervisors swear, scanners beep like alarms. Client calls support, support calls ops, ops calls engineering, and my pager becomes a siren. War room spins up, dashboards bleed red, and everyone looks sick. Root cause appears fast because root cause was never the hard part. Trailer weights were guessed wrong, constraints broke, and the algorithm cascaded into chaos exactly as predicted. We roll back, patch, hotfix, and keep the client from quitting on the spot. Damage is still done because leadership saw the failure and now wants someone's head to calm the client. Client demands a formal review, so Brad schedules an emergency all-hands titled "Critical Incident, Alignment Required." Room is packed, Zoom is full, and everyone looks like they slept under a desk. Brad starts the usual, "We're here to learn, not to blame," which is always a lie. Laura stands up before Brad finishes, because of course she does. Brad lets her because Brad's spine is made of wet cardboard and fear. Laura says this incident is not just technical, which is always the worst sentence in any company. She claims it's about engagement, resistance, and patterns of passivity. Voice rises, eyes sharpen, and suddenly it's not a meeting, it's a trial. "Why is everyone so passive?" she shouts like we're kids refusing to clap. "This looks like sabotage," she adds, and the word hangs in the air like smoke. She points at engineering and says people are withholding input to punish cultural change. She says silence is a weapon, and she says we are weaponizing silence. The part that makes my stomach flip is her certainty, like she already wrote the verdict. Dan raises his hand calmly and Brad calls on him like Brad is about to regret oxygen. Dan speaks in a weather report voice that has zero emotion to hook onto. He says the communication policy was followed exactly, including the part about men not interrupting. He says engineers waited to be called on and nobody dominated the discussion. He says concerns were raised in writing in the approved format before rollout. Rick from Ops adds he didn't want to step on toes during kickoff. Support manager adds they were aligning with the new standard and avoiding conflict. Each sentence is polite, measured, and deadly because each sentence is true. Laura's face twitches, like her brain is trying to rewrite reality in real time. She snaps back that we knew it was wrong and we let it happen anyway. Dan says the doc was sent, the risks were listed, and the decision still proceeded. Then Laura says the line that detonates the social contract in the room. "You're weaponizing my policy," she says, "like obedience itself is a crime." In that moment, clarity hits everyone at once, cold and clean. Talking gets you labeled aggressive, and silence gets you labeled sabotaging. There is no winning move inside her frame because her frame is designed to produce guilt. Brad ends the meeting early because he lost control and he knows it. People walk out quiet. The bad quiet, the kind that means something broke permanently. Real decision happens in the kitchen by the coffee machine, not in the conference room. 5 of us stand there holding cups like props, staring at the wall like it has answers. Dan says if we speak, we are oppressive, and if we don't, we are saboteurs. Mark says she just called us saboteurs for following her own rules. Rick says he's done being blamed for outcomes he's not allowed to influence. I ask what the winning move is, and Dan answers without drama. Stop saving her, he says like he's finally naming a boundary. No cheering happens because this isn't revenge, and nobody wants to be childish. Quiet agreement forms anyway, because nobody wants to volunteer for blame anymore. Monday arrives and the shift begins, boring on paper and nuclear in effect. Job description becomes the ceiling, not the floor. No more heroics that rescue bad meetings and no more late-night miracles without assignment. If a requirement is wrong, a ticket gets filed and we wait for approval to change scope. If a meeting chooses a bad decision, we document the decision and implement it as written. If someone wants input, they can ask directly, and we answer calmly in writing. Compliance becomes our shield because compliance is what Laura demanded. Work starts failing in visible ways once invisible glue work stops happening. Meetings slow down, decisions get worse, and the quiet, unowned tasks sit there like trash. Brad starts messaging about proactivity, and Dan replies asking for written clarification under current policy. Laura starts emailing about declining participation and engagement concerns. She writes that silence is not alignment and encourages everyone to lean in. Dan replies with one sentence asking which policy supersedes the previous policy. Laura replies with a paragraph about spirit, intention, and emotional responsibility. Dan replies again asking her to confirm actionable guidance in writing. Writing becomes a cage, and we keep building cages. Every email gets saved, every policy version gets screenshotted, and every meeting recording gets archived. Names and dates get logged like incident analysis because boring wins corporate fights. No insults go in chat because insults are fuel, and we are starving her of fuel. Laura tries warmth next, stopping by desks with that coached smile. She asks how we're doing really and whether we feel resistance in ourselves. Polite answers come back short and neutral because neutral is armor. Authority move follows when warmth fails, so she schedules mandatory workshops at lunch. Title is Allyship Through Silence, and I stare at my calendar like it's a prank. Consultant talks about holding space while Laura nods proudly in the front row. Dan sits calm as a monk. Mark stares at a wall and I count ceiling tiles. She calls it growth, and we call it paid nothing, because we do nothing and get paid. Trap attempt arrives next, the confidential feedback circle in a safe space. She says nothing will be used against anyone, which is always a lie dressed as comfort. Nobody says anything because we learned words become weapons in her hands. Weeks pass and the business starts suffering in ways executives can't ignore. Sales complains because promises are slipping. Support complains because bugs are stacking. Ops complains because ops always complains. Second major failure hits, smaller than the first but more dangerous, because it smells like legal risk. Client compliance auditor flags inconsistent reporting, and the word audit makes finance perk up like a predator. It's a known edge case we documented a month ago with a proposed fix and scope change. Decision never happened because meetings became theater instead of decision-making. Client escalates, threatens to leave, and finance starts watching the situation like it wants blood. Another emergency meeting gets scheduled, and Laura shows up like a ghost that feeds on stress. She talks about trust and accountability and asks why people won't speak up. Dan calmly says the warning doc went out on December 4th, and a decision request went out December 6th. He says no decision was made and engineering stands ready once approval exists. Laura tries to cut in, and Dan pauses and asks if she wants to revert norms. Room goes quiet again, and Laura sits back because she can't win loud. Afterward, Dan texts me and Mark one line that feels like a door locking. "We have enough," he writes, and I know exactly what he means. Cancellation stops being passive and becomes deliberate, professional, and painfully clean. No secret cancel Laura chat gets created because we're not idiots. Instead, facts go upward to people who care about numbers more than narratives. 15 minutes gets requested with Sarah, the VP of operations who hates theater. Sarah is respected because she cares about pain and cost, not slogans and vibes. Walking into her office feels like walking into a courtroom where math is the judge. We avoid culture war words because those trigger arguments instead of action. Policy impact, operational risk, measurable outcomes, Dan says, and Sarah leans forward. Timeline gets shown with dates, versions, and the accountability tracking line highlighted. Kickoff recording gets played where silence is praised as progress. Warning dot gets shown with the landmine risk spelled out before rollout. Incident timeline gets shown with client escalation and Laura's sabotage accusation. Second incident gets shown with prior written warning and no decision made. Metrics get shown trending downward, starting the week policy rolled out. Dan finishes with one sentence that lands like a hammer because it is boring. "We followed the policy exactly and we got accused anyway." Sarah doesn't react immediately, which is how you know she is furious. She scrolls, reads, nods once, and asks who approved the policy. Brad's endorsement email appears and Sarah's eyes narrow like a knife. "Leave it with me," she says, voice flat, and the meeting ends. Walking out feels surreal because nothing dramatic happened, yet everything just changed. 2 days later, Laura sends a company-wide email titled "Clarification on Norms." "Everyone may speak freely with respect," she writes, framing it like leadership. It doesn't matter anymore because the cancellation is about her behavior, not the document. Panic shows up anyway, and she makes the classic control person mistake. Dan gets pulled into a private meeting with legal present, labeled coaching. Malicious compliance gets thrown at him like an accusation, as if obedience is a felony. Dan asks which policy he violated, and Laura says the spirit of the policy. Dan asks her to point to the word spirit in the handbook. Legal guy clears his throat because spirit isn't enforceable. Laura's jaw tightens and her eyes flash because text just trapped her. Dan calmly lists the emails where concerns were raised and the meetings where norms were followed. Meeting ends with Laura saying she'll review options, which is corporate for "I'm losing." Panic makes her sloppy, and sloppy makes corporate doors close fast. Finance flags a compliance issue inside People Ops, missing contractor docs and mismatched onboarding records. Old World would have had someone quietly help Laura fix it before it escalated. New World lets the process run without unpaid rescue work. Finance escalates to Sarah, and Sarah asks Laura for documents by end of day. Laura responds with a long explanation about barriers and systems, not with documents. Sarah replies with one line asking again for documents. Then another line when nothing arrives. Failure to deliver turns into a leadership problem because finance is now involved. Leadership alignment meeting gets scheduled. Closed door. No workers invited. Rumors leak anyway because offices leak like sieves. Sarah reportedly slides metrics across the table and plays the sabotage clip from the meltdown meeting. One question gets asked, simple and brutal. Why accuse them when they followed your policy? Laura reportedly freezes because she can't answer without admitting her frame was built to blame. 2 days later, Laura's calendar goes blank like someone wiped her existence. Workshops disappear, recurring meetings get canceled, and her Zoom presence stops showing up. Company email drops short and cold, the corporate version of a burial. Laura will be transitioning out of her role effective immediately. Thank you for contributions, direct questions elsewhere. No drama, no explanation, just a door closing with a polite smile. That's what real workplace cancellation looks like. Quiet and administrative and final. Brad gets reassigned to because Sarah doesn't waste anger on only one problem. Meetings start becoming normal again, like blood returning to a numb limb. Engineers speak, bad ideas get corrected early and the machine starts running smoother. Extra weird part shows up the next week when interim HR tries to rebuild trust with the survey. Survey asks how safe we feel, how heard we feel, and whether we want more workshops. Nobody trashes it, nobody jokes in public, nobody writes angry essays in the comments. Silence answers again, and the silence is a message. We want fewer experiments and more competence. Sarah holds one short all hands after that. No slides, no slogans, just one line. We will prioritize delivery and clarity, and we will stop making policy a substitute for leadership, she says. It lands harder than any speech Laura ever rehearsed, because it matches the pain everyone lived through. 1 month later, I see Laura in the lobby picking up a box with security nearby. She looks smaller somehow, not physically, but socially, like her aura got turned off. Eyes meet and she steps closer like she wants a final scene. You all planned that, she says, voice low and sharp. I tell her we did our jobs and stopped volunteering to be blamed for hers. You destroyed my career, she says, and it sounds like she believes it. I remind her she screamed sabotage when we obeyed her, and she flinches at the word. You could have told me, she says, and that line almost makes me laugh. I tell her the warnings were sent in writing twice before the first incident exploded. She searches my face for anger she can label, but tired is not a label-friendly emotion. Security clears his throat politely, and the moment ends the way corporate moments end. She turns and walks out carrying a box labeled alumni materials from that leadership program. Standing there with coffee, no triumph shows up, just calm clarity. Nobody bullied her out, nobody yelled her out, nobody played games in public. The cancellation was simple. Hero work stopped, facts got documented, and leadership saw the truth in numbers. Space was requested, so we stepped aside, and she stood alone with her own policy.